At the farthest edge of the city, where the lamps burned with a tired amber glow, and the river moved beneath the bridges like a thought too old to be spoken, there stood a house whose windows reflected nothing. Not the moon, not the rain, not even the figures who passed before them at dusk. It was said, though never loudly, that the house had been built by a clockmaker who had lost faith in time. He had filled its walls with gears, pendulums, copper wires, glass bells, and delicate brass mechanisms that clicked and shivered long after his death, as though some invisible machine were still attempting to measure what could no longer be counted. Regret, perhaps, or longing, or the slow erosion of a promise once made in earnest.
On certain evenings, when the fog came rolling in from the river and softened the street lamps into pale, floating orbs, a sound could be heard from the upper rooms. Not music exactly, but something arranged like music, a rising phrase of metallic whispers, a pause, then a trembling descent, as if the house itself were trying to remember a lullaby taught to it by human hands. Children hurried past it. Adults pretended not to notice it. Dogs, wiser than either, refused the pavement before its gate and crossed the street with offended dignity. But Elias Venn, who had spent most of his life repairing instruments no one played anymore, stopped there one November evening, with a violin case in one hand and a letter in the other. The letter was written in a hand he recognized at once, though its author had been dead for 17 years. "Come before midnight," it said. "Bring the violin. Do not trust the clocks." He read the sentence 3 times, not because he failed to understand it, but because understanding it required him to reopen rooms inside himself he had locked with considerable effort. The rain tapped lightly against the brim of his hat. Somewhere behind the dark windows, a mechanism turned, hesitated, and resumed. Elias looked up. For one impossible moment, every clock in the city gave a different hour. Towers groaned out midnight. Parlors chimed dawn. Railway stations announced the hour of departure for trains long since vanished. Pocket watches trembled in closed drawers. Schoolroom clocks stuttered backward. Kitchen timers rang for meals no one had cooked. Forgotten mantelpieces whispered seconds in voices thin as thread. The city did not mark the time. It lost it. Then the house opened its door. Not with a creak, not with drama, with recognition.
Preliminary data analysis indicates a quantifiable correlation between workplace environmental stressors and overall employee productivity metrics. Over the fiscal year, a systematic evaluation was conducted to assess the long-term impact of metabolic fatigue and structural equipment failures on daily operational output. The primary objective of this study was to isolate specific variables contributing to micro-level performance degradation within the standard workforce environment.
Initial assessments revealed significant equipment vulnerabilities, specifically regarding localized mechanical anomalies in departmental transit assets. Due to supply chain constraints and subsequent maintenance scheduling backlogs, immediate remediation was non-viable. Consequently, personnel were subjected to prolonged periods of heightened cognitive load and anticipatory anxiety regarding equipment reliability. Furthermore, compounding factors, such as suboptimal workplace ergonomics and a lack of auditory stimuli during physical exertion trials, demonstrated a direct negative impact on stamina, leading to premature task abandonment.
Simultaneously, unexpected shifts in organizational strategy introduced substantial workplace volatility. The introduction of late-stage project reorientations necessitated rapid cognitive shifting, effectively depleting employee energetic reserves. Quantitative metrics illustrate that when personnel operate under conditions of severe burnout, structural efficiency declines exponentially. To mitigate these systemic stressors, management initiated a qualitative assessment of external peer-to-peer support networks. The implementation of structured, non-operational socialization intervals yielded a statistically significant improvement in psychological recovery rates. Data indicates that casual interpersonal engagement effectively neutralizes cortisol accumulation induced by professional and mechanical stressors. In conclusion, mitigating operational friction requires a dual-pronged approach, prioritizing preventative equipment maintenance and fostering robust internal support systems to optimize human capital retention and performance.
So my car has been making this super weird clicking sound every time I turn the steering wheel to the left. It's been doing it for like a week now, and honestly, I've just been ignoring it and hoping it magically goes away. But this morning, it sounded way louder than usual, so I finally braced myself and called the mechanic. Of course, they can't fit me in until next Tuesday, so now I'm just crossing my fingers that my wheels don't fly off while I'm driving to work. Speaking of work, things have been absolutely hectic lately. We're in the middle of wrapping up this massive project, and it feels like everyone is completely stressed out and running on fumes. Yesterday, my boss called an emergency meeting just to tell us we had to change up the entire strategy at the last minute. I was so tempted to just throw my hands up and walk out right then and there, but hey, a paycheck's a paycheck, right? To blow off some steam after that disaster of a day, I decided to hit the gym, which is honestly a miracle for me because I usually find any excuse to skip out. I ended up jumping on the treadmill for a bit, but after about 10 minutes, I realized I totally forgot to bring my headphones. Let me tell you, running in complete silence while staring at a blank wall is next level torture. I barely made it to 15 minutes before I just gave up and went home to eat leftovers back in my bed. Oh, by the time I finally sat down on the couch, my friend texted me asking if I wanted to grab dinner tonight. Part of me really wanted to just stay in my sweatpants and binge watch whatever's trending on Netflix, but then I realized I hadn't actually socialized in days. So I dragged myself out of bed, threw on some actual clothes, and met up with him at this little taco place around the corner. And man, I'm so glad I actually forced myself to go. We ended up sitting there for hours just laughing about old high school stories and making fun of how ridiculous we used to look back then. It's funny how a good talk with an old friend can completely turn a bad day around. By the time I walked back to my apartment, I felt 10 times better and totally forgot all about my broken car and my annoying boss.
To be conscious is not merely to observe the world, as a mirror observes a passing face. It is to discover that every perception already contains a judgment, every memory a distortion, and every desire a question disguised as certainty. The stone does not wonder why it falls. The river does not doubt the necessity of its descent. But the human being, divided from his own immediacy, asks not only what is happening, but what does it mean that this is happening to me?
Here begins the torment and dignity of thought. We awaken into existence surrounded by interpretations we did not choose, a name given before self-knowledge, a language inherited before consent, a history pressing silently upon the present, and a body that reminds the mind through hunger, fatigue, pleasure, shame, and decay that it is not sovereign over itself. Yet within this captivity, there remains a difficult freedom, the freedom to question one's own motives, to suspect the voice that says, "I want,"
and to ask whether it truly belongs to the self, or whether it is merely the echo of the world speaking from within. To live without examination is to be carried by invisible architecture.
One may spend years obeying fears mistaken for wisdom, customs mistaken for truth, and ambitions mistaken for destiny. One may become admirable to others while remaining unknown to oneself. This is why philosophy is not a decoration of intelligence, but a discipline of awakening. It interrupts habit. It delays certainty. It teaches the mind to hesitate before the obvious, because the obvious is often only the familiar wearing the mask of truth. And still, one must live. One must choose, forgive, refuse, love, speak, and act before understanding is complete. The tragedy of human existence is not that we know nothing, but that we must decide before we know enough. Perhaps wisdom, then, is disciplined uncertainty, the ability to doubt without paralysis, to believe without fanaticism, and to love without demanding that life becomes simple. For consciousness is both wound and lantern. It wounds because it separates us from simple being. It illuminates because through that separation, the world becomes visible, not merely as fact, but as mystery.